It's a great pleasure to welcome Fortinet to the My Broadband Cloud Conference 2021. No stranger is Paul Williams, who's the country manager for Fortinet South Africa and the Indian Ocean Islands. A great pleasure to welcome you, Paul. Modern enterprise networks are really quite diverse, and often they span multiple environments, each with their own unique requirements and standards, of course, and securing each of these network ecosystems independently creates a real challenge for consistent policy enforcement, transparency, and unified orchestration and response. So organizations are really tasked with securing multiple network edges, often in the hybrid cloud environment, while maintaining consistent unified security operations. So, Paul, it's really, really good to see you against that backdrop. I mean, we're living in a really complicated era now with this remote working environment, and I guess that we did have those security concerns before COVID, but I think that COVID has really accelerated things and made them even acutely more important to look at. So it's really good to see you. And how are you, firstly?
Well, I'm fine. Thanks, Aki, and thanks for inviting me to this great session today. And yeah, it has been tough. I think the last 2+ years, even the beginning of 2019, when we all started seeing this variation come forward, has been a bit of a challenge. But we've seen different disciplines from different businesses, and different companies are actually being asking us different questions. Yeah. So I think there's been a mind shift in the CXOs, and we've seen a mind shift in the organizations and IT departments, as well as people working from home, accessing data, accessing certain parts of the network, getting security as a real mindset now. And this is the important part we want to talk about today.
Well, look, cloud security, I'm glad you raised it. I mean, it's really a critical component to manage cloud assets. Everyone's moving to the cloud, but what are some of those challenges associated with cloud security, Paul?
Yeah, so cloud security is an interesting one because, I think if you spoke about 2 to 5 years ago, people spoke to you and said, oh, well, I'll put maybe 10% or 20% of my investment in cloud. And then people started changing their mind because I think a lot of people realizing that as soon as you're putting your data at the edge of the network, it gives a lot more accessibility to the users actually accessing this data. And also the application, the way the application flows to the network, it's actually easier for the application to be on the edge of the network, or basically on the cloud edge, as we call it. And then basically the users could then access the data and actually be more agile and more flexible in the way they're accessing the data. So no matter if they were sitting in a cafe or basically in a hotel room or in a lobby downstairs or an airport, who really cared? And I think the element is the cloud was brought closer to the user, not the user brought closer to the cloud. So I think that is the important part.
So, I mean, when you talk about what you've just spoken about now, the backdrop of that, I mean, what kind of considerations should businesses be aware of when approaching cloud security?
Yeah. So the important part I always talk about is basically getting the crucial fundamentals of the foundation of cloud. And the foundation is basically the important part is about what any foundation is that you've got to have a solid foundation of the way you're doing cloud activities with security. When we talk about that, typically is, if you build anything with a foundation, it has to be strong, it has to be secure, it has to take the load or the weight-bearing effects of what's being asked of it. If you talk about a couple of users, when you start the cloud activity, but, you kind of scale it out later, and, you go from 10 users to 100 users to 1,000 users, you've got to ensure that the cloud can scale with the demand of the user and the applications. Over and above that, as you know, is that no more than one user has more than 2 devices these days. We have more than 3 devices now. I mean, I'm seeing some users with 4 devices. It's crazy. And that is important because trying to secure all those devices to a single user profile is important. So how do we do that? Is obviously cloud, offers that type of functionality as well. We can secure the cloud, but it always comes back to the point of, security versus cloud versus transformation. And I always tie the two is digital transformation and security transformation have to equal each other. And that's the important part. So that's kind of how we try and push the messaging with our customers.
So when you look at those key requirements for cloud security solutions, what would they be?
So those requirements typically can start at a very basic level with e-commerce. So, if you take e-commerce today, e-commerce has accelerated, I think, faster than we can actually even absorb the information that's been given to us. I mean, we have big push now for social media. With regards to that is when those applications are being pushed towards you, is how do you ensure that the user using that application and all devices is secured and has a single profile, but that single profile is actually spread across multiple devices, if that makes sense to you. And the important part here is user access of what that user wants. So for example, I always like to use, if I'm sitting in an open area like a Wi-Fi cafe or a lobby, I maybe want access to certain, because I'm obviously in an open network. So then I basically restrict the user. When the user logs onto the network, he gets access to a certain part of the network. But when he's inside the corporate VPN, or he fires up a VPN connection, then he can get access to as much data as possible, but based on his profile. So for example, if he's an HR manager, access to the certain data that he actually requires, not access to all. If he's an IT manager, yes, he might have access to all the services. Over and above that, we started to push things that, we call this thing called zero trust now. So with zero trust, pushing the application, pushing the reality of what's the user want to do, what's the application want to do, and what are the devices want to do. So we challenge each of those at certain levels of the network inside the cloud, or basically at the edge of the cloud as well.
Yeah, I mean that the zero trust is everyone is using zero trust. It's a new buzzword in security, isn't it? But I think it's such an important one, to try and understand. You just cannot trust anything today in terms of cybersecurity and in the cloud. But we often hear of adaptive cloud security. What is adaptive cloud security?
Adaptive cloud security basically means that it's an access level where you actually allow to give the customer, the person accessing the network a lot more flexibility. So if I'm accessing adaptive cloud security in a way where I'm actually giving a user to an application, he basically gets challenged. And basically, if he challenges the right credentials, then he's allowed access to the network. Although that said, when the user does move off the network and he basically moves to another network, he might have a refresh of an IP address or might have a refresh of a network. We try and challenge that user again, because we don't know that user's device might have been stolen, it might have gone missing, somebody might have pickpocketed him. We don't know these things. So we basically try and keep that down. And, I was going to bring you back to the point about zero trust. When I started speaking about zero trust about 18 months ago, I think CXO's eyes were this big. They said to me,
Yes.
What are you talking about? Why are you talking about zero trust? You're telling me I don't trust my users. I said, no, it's not that. I said, what we're trying to do is we're trying to harden the user accessing the network. We're trying to ensure that when the user challenges himself and says, I'm Paul Williams, I work for Fortinet, and I'm using a mobile device to authenticate myself at a third level with a user ID and password and a token, that's what we're talking about zero trust. It's not that we don't trust the user. All we're trying to say is we're trying to ensure that your network is secure and hardened down as far as possible.
Well, actually, I heard the term at the conference that I did for you guys about 18 months ago. So you've just sparked that into my mind. I mean, when you look at Fortinet, what differentiates Fortinet's adaptive cloud security solution from everybody else?
So our cloud security has come a long way. I mean, we've basically been doing adaptive cloud security now for over 45 years. I think when we started this journey of having adaptive cloud security, we basically started down the road of the very basics. We worked with the big brands like the VMs and the Microsofts and the Azures. But what we started seeing is more elasticity around what these big public and private cloud providers want us to do and actually how to help them. So with adaptive cloud security means I can actually have a data center environment. I can have an application in the cloud, and I can basically create more flexibility to the user. So if I'm accessing the data that I'm trying to access, and inside the data center, and basically trying to access part of the data in the cloud, what I'm trying to do is bring everything together in an adaptive manner that I actually see everything on a single pane of glass, number one. Number two is when I authenticate once, authenticate into the cloud or into the data center, but that authentication basically keeps challenging my machine all the time. So no matter if I am going to move around or I'm staying in the same position, or I decide to change or open up a new browser session because I might be running two browsers on my machine, that again is another level of challenging, because, and I don't like to say this, but when you are running multiple browsers for whatever reason on your machine, you also got to understand, people will plant things like SQL injection, poison cookies. They will try and put things like malware type applications on your browsers, put them inside cache. And I don't know if you've noticed of late, is every time you open up a new browser session now, is everyone's asking you, do you accept the cookies?
Yes.
So the answer is, that's it. That's been a big push now. And that's come from this whole thing about POPI. So when you talk about that, is that you've got to set your own cookie settings inside your browser settings. No matter if you refresh the screen or you basically open a new session, what it's doing is that this adaptive function basically means we've got to challenge all the time. Challenge the user all the time, because that's the important part. creating that function.
So, Paul, I mean, it's interesting to look at the scenario from taking a step back. As I said earlier, I've hosted several of your conferences, and I'm going back to the pre-COVID days where we had no idea that COVID-19 was around us, including the last conference that I did for Fortinet, which was done virtually. And I guess that it's amazing how things have changed. And when you look at the backdrop of our discussion today and you look at the dangers that lurk out there, how are we doing in South Africa? How are we doing globally? Are there massive security gaps in the way we do our everyday business remotely, or however we're doing it right now? Are there massive gaps out there?
Yeah, so I think let's take 18 months ago. So 18 months ago when this whole thing hit us, basically I think a lot of CXOs took the decision to obviously put their people at home. That said, Fortinet took the approach, and we took a couple of products together and actually said, how can we quickly and quite easily manage and provide a solution, a secure solution to customers actually becoming teleworkers. And that teleworking means basically I have an internet connection at home. I'm sharing the same home network with my son or my daughter or my wife, because we're all working at home now in the same environment. But at the same time, remember that all these devices are open, plus the internet connection that you're getting from your service provider doesn't have a fully managed secure solution either. So we basically said, how can we obviously talk to these users, put a secure environment at home for the teleworkers? And this was driven out of, looking at things like endpoint, looking at things as basically a small firewall, and things like addition over and above that is secure VPN cloud connections to their corporate offices as well. To answer your second part of your question, how was this done? I think a lot of people in the beginning were being hacked. We saw lots of phishing attacks on many users, especially working from home, because of the security requirements, not actually having the right types of applications, endpoint type security on these devices and digital devices. Over and above that, we also saw a huge uptake of email spamming, basically whaling attacks, people basically playing games with people that didn't actually know security to the full extent. So we saw that. Also, we saw another part of aspect is kids were gaming a lot at home because, obviously they had nothing else to do after their homework. They couldn't go out and play with their friends next door, so they were gaming. And a lot of these gaming portals that people are now using took advantage of actually trying to corrupt those networks. And that basically means when these corruptions took place is they would bring down the whole network. They would try and, command and control the network, try and actually access data inside the environment, and then try and steal data. Especially if it's a CIO of a company sitting at home and his network's open, guess what they're going to do? They're going to plant a bit of malware, they're going to suck data off his machine, and actually maybe even ask him for a bit of ransomware. Why not? It's quite easy to be done. And then the second we started seeing is as soon as this started happening, the word got out very quickly, is that how can we help our customers do this? And we were having many phone calls with many people in each country that I obviously look after in SADC and Indian Ocean Islands. And everyone was asking us the same questions. How quickly can we secure and provide solutions to my employees at home? And how can we ensure that we manage it, we get visibility of these attacks and shut them down as fast as possible? And we basically, I think we got that right in about 12 to 14 months. A lot of these customers started hardening this stuff. And then ironically, what happened after that is when we went back to the same customers, they said, well, thanks for doing such a great job, but we actually don't want to send these users back to work. And we said, why not? They said, because, the government's kind of like in between two minds. And then we started seeing the adaptation of, CXOs are only sending 30% of their work staff back to the offices and 70% will stay at home. So this whole new mobile workforce started coming and evolving inside the network. And what did that mean? Number one, the cloud plus the data center had to basically be equipped with additional and new security requirements. And it leads us back to this whole thing about zero trust.
That's absolutely fascinating. You just have to relook at everything. Who would have thought that gaming would have been that vulnerability in this lockdown? But if you look at it logically, how that network is open up and you're getting through there, and then from there you can get into the company network, it's actually pretty scary. But amazing chatting to you. Thank you so much for your insights, Paul. And thanks to Fortinet for joining us at this year's Cloud Conference. Paul Williams, Country Manager for Fortinet Southern Africa and the Indian Ocean Islands. Thanks for joining us, Paul. Take care.
You too. You look after yourself. Be safe.
Cheers. Bye-bye.